This is Phil Gibbs from OpenMake Software, and in this video we're going to show you Release Engineer deploying application changes into Cloud Foundry. For those of you unfamiliar with Cloud Foundry, it's basically an open source platform as a service offering from Pivotal. Essentially it offers a number of distinct target spaces which will typically map to stages in a life cycle. So here you can see our demo application. This is essentially an application that Pivotal provides as a simple demo app that you can push to Cloud Foundry, and all we've done here is add a version number to the header so that we can see how it changes as it progresses through the life cycle. You can see that we have a development space, we have a test space, and we have two production spaces called blue and green, which we'll talk about in a little while. Now, Release Engineer also has the concept of a life cycle or pipeline through which changes to applications are transitioned. So there's a nice synergy there whereby we can map stages in Release Engineer to spaces in our Cloud Foundry target. So let's take a look at Release Engineer and take a look at what we've got. So here you can see we have our demo application, and you can see that there's two versions of this app. There's version 2 sitting in dev, and version 1 is currently being deployed to our development environment, our test environment, and our production environment, as you've just seen. It's worth noting, only a single production environment in Release Engineer, but this maps to two distinct spaces, those blue and green spaces that we saw earlier. This is to allow us to implement a blue-green deployment strategy for production, whereby we deploy to our blue space. The testers do our testing in that blue space, while all the actual real end users are still pointing at green. We only switch our users to blue and deploy to green once we're satisfied that blue is working correctly. So that strategy is all implemented in Release Engineer, and we'll show you we can do that a little later in the demo. Now, if we take a look at our dev space, you can see that we have a memory limit of 256 meg, and our test and production environments all have a limit of 512 meg. Now that is controlled by a configuration file that is pushed along with the other files up to Cloud Foundry, and you can see the configuration file we have here, and there's a placeholder there which will get substituted automatically with the correct memory limit for our target environment, and Release Engineer will handle all of that for us. We'll show you how that's done in a minute. So let's go ahead and deploy version 2 into our development environment. So to do that, I'm just going to right click, I'm going to do deploy, I'm going to pick my development environment, and I'm going to click OK to set that process running. So now what's going to happen is that Release Engineer is now going to pull the files out that make up version 2 of our demo application, and it's going to run the Cloud Foundry commands to upload that into Cloud Foundry. Now, you remember the that configuration file that we showed earlier with that memory placeholder. You can see that we've got a memory placeholder, a memory attribute here for our development environment of 256 meg. And for our test and production environments, it's set to 512. So Release Engineer will actually use those values from the target environment and substitute it into that placeholder in that configuration file. And that's how we can configure the memory per space, if you like. So Release Engineer takes care of all that for us. All we did was we right-clicked and hit deploy. So let's go back to our demo application and look at our deployment log now. So you can see the first thing that it did was it told us we were deploying demo version 2 into our dev env. We're pulling the files from Git, so we've essentially switched the Git head to version 2. We've checked out all the files, and we're in the process of deploying. And all of this information here is all come back from Cloud Foundry. So all of this updated text information here is all the results from calling the Cloud Foundry command. So all that is captured and stored in our deployment log so that we can see what's happened. If I go and have a look at our parent application now and look at our environments, you can see that Release Engineer now knows that version 2 is sitting in development and version 1 is still in our test and production environments. And if I go to our test environment, our development environment and refresh, you can see that we've gone to version 2. We've deployed version 2 successfully with Cloud Foundry. It's still in space development. The memory limit is still set to 256, as we saw before, and our test environments and production environments are still at version 1 and set to 512. Okay, so that's good. We've got that deployed into development environment. We're happy. We want to go ahead and move that into test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that into my test domain, and from there I'm going to deploy that, and I'm going to target my test environment in the same way that we deployed into development. Now, it's worthwhile pointing out that that move that we just did from development to test could have an approval gate on it. It's sometimes necessary to prevent application versions being moved through the life cycle without the appropriate authorization. So you can put approval gates at each stage to prevent the application from being moved through the life cycle unless somebody in authority signs that off, and then that would be audited. We've not done that in this particular example, so we've just been able to move the application version through the life cycle. But it's entirely up to you when you implement Release Engineer as to whether you want those approval gates and at what stage you want to put them on. We haven't just for speed, but you can do if you so desire. So we've just deployed version 2 into test. Let's have a look. You can see that's our deployment 2098. Look at our deployment log. Again, we've deploying version 2 into our test environment. We're pulling from Git. We've pulled out the files, and if I refresh that, that's just in the process of deploying. And yeah, you can see it's taken 66 seconds and it's finally completed. And that's the output from Cloud Foundry. So we can now go to our test environment and refresh that. And you can see that's now gone to version 2. That limit is 512 has been set automatically during the deployment. We're in our test space. Okay, so far so good. What I'm going to do now is do a deployment into production, and in this process you'll see the that sort of blue-green deployment strategy that we were talking about. So in order to do that, I'm going to move this up into production, and once version 2 is in production, I can now deploy it. And I'm going to target our production environment. Okay, now. The blue-green deployment strategy involves us deploying to our blue environment, and then we're going to wait until we're happy that the blue is working correctly, and then we're going to deploy into green. Now we can do that in a number of ways. I mean, we could actually have 2 production environments, one called blue and one called green, and we can deploy to the blue environment and then just deploy to green once we're happy that blue is been successful. But what we're doing here is we're showing the power of Release Engineer by actually doing this in 2 stages. So we're deploying to blue, and then we're going to automatically wait. So the deployment will actually pause and wait for us to confirm that the deployment to blue has been successful before we go ahead and deploy to green. So at the moment the deployment is happening into our blue environment. At the point where it has been successfully deployed to blue, it will then pause. Now you can see we've got an email here now. It says the application demo app 2 has been deployed. Let's just have a look at what that says. You can see the application demo app 2 has been deployed to blue environment successfully. Please check the deployment has been successful and approve or reject accordingly. If approved, green environment will be deployed also, and if rejected, green environment will be left as is. So Release Engineer sent out an email, the content of which is fully configurable. If we refresh that timeline, you can see that it's requested an approval. So we're actually waiting for this thing to be approved. So what I'm going to do is just go onto our blue environment and refresh that. And you can see that's gone to version 2. And our green environment, refresh just to, it's still at version 1. So at the moment, all our users are still pointing at this version. What our testers can now do is have a look at this particular version in our blue space. So we can look at that. I mean, obviously that's the only change. So we're going to say, yeah, that's good to go. So in order to trigger it to deploy to our green environment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just approve this for our archive state. And I'm going to click OK to approve it. And what that's going to do is that's going to trigger Release Engineer into now deploying into the green environment. Now, how does that work? How is that configured? Well, if you look at these applications, you'll see that we've got a custom action called push pivotal that's associated with the application. So rather than doing the normal pulling of components and deploying those components to servers within the target environment, we're running a custom action which will do all of this in a custom way. So let me have a look at what that looks like. And essentially that calls push to pivotal, and this is the code that is executed. Now this is in Release Engineer's own scripting language called DM script. And the reason we use this, for those of you who've seen some of our other videos, you'll know that you can call any script externally using Release Engineer. So you can write scripts in Java, in VB script, in JavaScript, in shell script, depending on your platform. You can write a binary executable even. You can write in anything really that you can call and interact with. But you also have the ability to write code in DM script, which is what we're doing here. And the reason we want to do that is because DM script has access to the Release Engineer's object model. So we can do specific bits of processing based on that approval process that we just ran, for example. So ignoring the Git switch to our head here, what we're doing is we're creating a drop zone. And a drop zone is just an area on disk where we can manipulate files. Release Engineer is an agentless solution. So if you want to change any file, for example, change a placeholder marker, you do it within a drop zone before those files are pushed out to the target. So we've created a drop zone, and what we're going to do is we're just going to check out from our Spring repository, which is a Git repository. And all that will do is pull all the files out that we saw before that make up that demo application. Then we're going to modify the manifest YAML file, which you saw before, and we're going to do a simple text replace, and we're going to replace memory underscore memory underscore with $memory. And $memory is an attribute value that will change depending on our target environment. So when we deploy to dev, memory is 256M. When we deploy to any other environment, it's 512M. So all that does is replace underscore memory underscore in manifest YAML with the relevant value from our target environment. And so that automatically sets the correct memory in that configuration file. We then get the base directory for this drop zone. So we do $dropzone.path, which gives us the directory, and we call pivotal push. And pivotal push is actually an external script that takes a couple of parameters, the base directory and the space that we're targeting, either blue, green, development or test, and that is mapped to the environment as well. So that basically does the CF push and runs the CF push command. So it CDs to that directory and runs CF push, and essentially that pushes those files up with that manifest.yaml file having had its memory changed. And when we deployed to dev and we deployed to test, that's pretty much all that we needed to do. Here we get the specific operations for production, and we're saying if space is blue, then this is a production deployment. So we run the request approval task. That was the task that executed to send the email out that you saw come into my inbox, which said, you know, we've had a successful deployment to blue, please authorize. And then we just wait. We wait for the approved task to be run. So at that point, the actual deployment suspends because it's waiting for us to execute that task. So what we did then was we went and executed the approval process. And the next bit says, okay, get me the list of approvals for this application and check that we're approved for our archive stage. And if we're approved for archive, then it's been approved, and we do pivotal push again, and we set the space to green, which will then deploy the same code that we just pulled from here. It'll push it to the green space as well as the blue. If we rejected, which we didn't do, but if we were to reject that because the blue deployment hadn't worked, then approvals.archive would be rejected, and it would drop into here, just echo into the log, application was rejected, and exit, and we wouldn't push to green. So that's very simple bit of DM script that we've fully automated that blue-green deployment process. If I go back to our version 2 of our application, look at our timeline, we can see that we approved it. We go back to our deployment log. You can see if we go down to here that we executed request approve, and we were waiting for task approve to be run. Task approve was completed by user CF1, which is me, and then the next bunch of output is again the output from Cloud Foundry, say that was the deployment to green, that's been successful. So if I now go to my green environment and refresh that, you can see that's gone to version 2 as well. So now blue and green are the same version. So that's that. That's Release Engineer deploying into Cloud Foundry. It's worth noting in conclusion that we haven't got any specific integrations in Release Engineer to make it work with Cloud Foundry. The tool is flexible enough to integrate with nearly any other third-party tool, and a combination of external scripts and DM scripting has allowed us to build that integration pretty quickly. Okay, I hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much, and goodbye.